Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. Would you marry a man who had never opened his eyes and might never open them at all? The question echoed through Elena Hartwell's mind as she stood at the front of a small stone church on a gray October afternoon. Outside, cold rain tapped softly against the stained glass windows. Inside, fewer than 20 people occupied the pews. No laughter, no celebration, no excited whispers about a beautiful future. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if everyone present knew they were witnessing something that should never have happened. Elena tightened her trembling fingers around a bouquet of white roses. The flowers were fresh. The satin dress fit perfectly. Everything looked like a wedding, yet nothing felt like one. At 24 years old, she had imagined many versions of this day. She had imagined standing beside a man who smiled when he looked at her. She had imagined exchanging vows, sharing nervous laughter, maybe even crying tears of happiness. She had never imagined standing alone at the altar while her groom lay unconscious nearly 50 feet away. Her eyes drifted toward the front row where a specialized medical transport bed had been positioned beside the minister. Declan Whitmore rested motionless beneath a navy blanket. His dark hair was neatly combed. His face looked peaceful, too peaceful, like someone caught between two worlds. 8 months earlier, he had been one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in America. Newspapers had called him a visionary. Business magazines had featured him on their covers. Investors followed his every move. Then one terrible night changed everything. Since then, he had not spoken a single word. He had not attended a board meeting. He had not opened his eyes. Elena swallowed hard. She barely knew the man she was about to marry. In truth, she knew more about him from magazine articles than from real life. Beside her, the minister cleared his throat and opened a leather-bound book. "We are gathered here today," his voice faded into the background. Elena's attention shifted toward the second row. Her father sat there, avoiding her gaze. Richard Hartwell looked uncomfortable in his borrowed suit. He kept adjusting his tie and glancing toward the attorneys seated nearby. Elena knew exactly why. The legal agreement had already been signed. The debts that had haunted her family for years would disappear by tomorrow morning. The mortgage would be paid. The collection notices would stop arriving. Her father's struggling construction company would survive. The price was standing here. The price was becoming Mrs. Whitmore. Elena felt something twist painfully inside her chest. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to resent her father for placing her in this impossible position. But when she looked at him, she saw exhaustion instead of greed. Years of failure had carved deep lines into his face. Years of trying and losing. Years of pretending everything would somehow work out. "I'm sorry," he had whispered the night before. "If there were any other way, I would choose it." Elena had believed him. That somehow made everything harder. The minister continued speaking. Lawyers watched silently. Nurses stood near the transport bed. Rain drummed softly against the church roof. Then Elena noticed something strange. Everyone else seemed focused on paperwork, contracts, and appearances. Nobody was looking at Declan. Nobody except her. For reasons she could not explain, she stepped closer to the transport bed. She studied his face. The billionaire looked younger than the photographs she had seen. More human. Less like the powerful executive described in headlines. She wondered if he had family members who sat beside him at night. She wondered if he could somehow hear the voices around him. She wondered if he felt lonely trapped inside the silence. The thought broke her heart. The minister nodded gently. "Please take his hand." A nurse carefully lifted Declan's right hand from beneath the blanket. Elena hesitated before reaching forward. His skin felt warm, real, alive, not like a symbol, not like a contract, not like a billionaire, just a person, someone who could not speak for himself, someone who had no idea. A wedding was taking place around him. Elena's throat tightened. The room blurred slightly. She lowered her eyes and whispered so quietly that nobody else could hear. "I don't know if you can hear me, Declan, but if you can, I'm sorry this happened to both of us." Silence followed. A long silence. Then something unexpected happened. A faint electronic beep sounded from one of the monitoring devices attached to the transport bed. Elena looked up. The line on the small screen jumped slightly. Only for a second. Then it returned to normal. One nurse frowned briefly before checking the display. "Probably interference," another murmured. Neither seemed concerned. The ceremony continued. The guests paid no attention, but Elena couldn't stop staring. Because for the briefest moment, she could have sworn she felt Declan's fingers tighten around hers. Only slightly. Only enough to make her question whether it had happened at all. Her heart began beating faster. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, the vows moved forward. And somewhere beneath the silence that had trapped him for 8 long months, something deep within Declan Whitmore seemed to stir. The morning after the wedding, Elena arrived at Whitmore Estate just before sunrise. The wrought iron gates opened slowly, revealing a property so vast it seemed to disappear into the rolling hills beyond. She had seen photographs online before, but nothing prepared her for reality. The mansion stretched across nearly 2 acres, built from pale stone and framed by towering oak trees whose branches swayed gently in the cold autumn breeze. Most people would have looked at the estate and seen luxury. Elena saw loneliness. The house felt quiet in a way that made her chest ache. Not peaceful. Empty. A black sedan carried her up the long circular driveway before stopping beneath a covered entrance. A middle-aged woman in a navy suit greeted her immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said politely. The title sounded strange. Elena was not sure it would ever feel natural. "I am Margaret Reeves, the estate manager. Welcome home." Home. The word felt almost impossible. Elena followed Margaret through enormous hallways lined with paintings, crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors. Every room looked perfect. Every surface gleamed. Yet despite the beauty, something was missing. There were no family photographs. No signs of laughter. No evidence that anyone truly lived here anymore. The mansion felt frozen in time, waiting for someone who never returned. Eventually, they reached the private medical wing that had been created specifically for Declan. The doors opened quietly. Elena stepped inside and immediately noticed the difference. The luxury vanished. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked. Sunlight filtered through large windows overlooking the gardens. In the center of the room rested Declan, exactly where she had last seen him, exactly as silent. A nurse reviewed charts near the doorway. Another adjusted medication before leaving. Neither seemed surprised by Elena's arrival. They simply treated her as another part of the daily routine. "His condition remains stable," one nurse explained. "There have been no significant changes." Elena nodded but said nothing. Her thoughts drifted back to the church, to that brief moment when she thought she felt his fingers move. Perhaps she imagined it. Perhaps she wanted so badly to believe something extraordinary had happened that her mind created it. Even so, she could not forget the feeling. Once the room emptied, she slowly approached the bed. Morning sunlight touched Declan's face. He looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man who had fallen asleep after an exhausting day. Elena pulled a chair beside him and sat down. For several minutes, she simply listened to the rhythmic sounds of the monitors. The silence felt uncomfortable at first, then strangely familiar. "Well," she finally said with a nervous smile, "I suppose this makes us roommates." The words sounded ridiculous. She almost laughed at herself. Declan remained motionless. Elena folded her hands together. "I have no idea what I am supposed to do here." She glanced toward the window. "Everyone keeps acting like this marriage is some kind of arrangement. Maybe it is, but that does not seem fair to you." She hesitated before continuing. "You do not even know me." The room remained silent. Yet speaking felt easier now. Throughout the afternoon, Elena returned several times. She talked about small things. The drive to the estate. The rain from yesterday. The coffee she accidentally spilled on her dress that morning. None of it mattered. And somehow that made it easier. There were no expectations. No judgment. No interruptions. By evening, she found herself sitting beside him again. The sky outside glowed orange and gold as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Elena noticed a bookshelf in the corner containing dozens of novels. Most appeared untouched. Curious, she selected one with a worn leather cover and returned to her chair. "My mother used to read to me when I was little," she said softly. "Maybe reading helps pass the time." She opened the book and began reading aloud. Her voice filled the room. Steady, warm, unhurried. Chapter after chapter, the words flowed through the quiet space. Outside, darkness settled over the estate. Staff members changed shifts. Lights flickered on throughout the mansion. Still, Elena continued reading. Then, nearly an hour later, something unusual happened. One of the monitors emitted a slightly different tone. Elena looked up. The numbers had changed. Only by a fraction. She stared at the screen. Another small change followed. Not dangerous. Not dramatic. Just different. A nurse entered moments later to perform routine checks. She frowned at the display. That is odd, she murmured. What is? Elena asked. The nurse studied the monitor before shrugging. Probably nothing. His neural activity increased slightly. Elena glanced toward Declan. The nurse finished her notes and left without another thought. But Elena remained frozen in her chair. Because the increase had happened while she was reading. And for the first time since arriving at Whitmore Estate, she found herself wondering if somewhere beyond the silence, Declan Whitmore was listening. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet routine settled over Whitmore Estate. Every morning Elena carried a cup of coffee into Declan's room, even though she was the only one drinking it. Every afternoon she read aloud from the same worn novel she had found on the bookshelf. Every evening she sat beside the window and talked about whatever crossed her mind. At first, she felt foolish speaking to someone who never answered. But slowly the silence stopped feeling empty. It felt occupied, as though someone was listening from very far away. The nurses noticed changes before the doctors did. Tiny changes, almost impossible to measure. Slight increases in neural activity. Small fluctuations whenever Elena spent long periods in the room. Nothing dramatic enough to make headlines. Nothing significant enough to raise expectations. Yet the pattern repeated again and again. One afternoon, Dr. Raymond Keller reviewed several charts while standing near the foot of Declan's bed. His brow furrowed. When did these spikes begin? He asked. A nurse glanced toward Elena. Mostly during conversations. The doctor looked skeptical. Conversations? Mrs. Whitmore reads to him. Talk to him. Sometimes for hours. Dr. Keller studied the data. Interesting. Elena shifted uncomfortably. You make it sound like I am performing magic. The doctor smiled faintly. No, but the human brain is not always predictable. After he left, Elena stared at Declan's motionless face. Hear that? She said softly. Apparently you are being mysterious again. She opened the novel and continued reading. Outside, golden leaves drifted across the estate grounds. Autumn has deepened. Days grew shorter. The mansion remained quiet. Yet Elena began noticing things she had missed before. The way sunlight landed across Declan's pillow every morning. The faint scent of cedar from the fireplace downstairs. The fact that his room always felt less lonely when she was there. One evening, while organizing a drawer, she discovered an old digital voice recorder. The device looked several years old. Curious, she pressed a button. A male voice filled the room. Declan's voice. Strong. Confident. Alive. Elena froze. Success is never about money, the recording said. It is about building something that matters. The message ended. Elena swallowed hard. Hearing him speak for the first time felt strangely emotional. For several seconds, she simply stared at the recorder in her hand. Then an idea formed. The next morning she returned with fresh batteries. I hope you do not mind me borrowing this, she told him. She pressed record. At first she did not know what to say. Then the words came naturally. She talked about the weather. About the gardener who accidentally chased a squirrel across the lawn. About a recipe her mother used to make every Thanksgiving. She recorded stories from her childhood. Small memories. Ordinary moments. Every evening, she played the recordings beside his bed after she left. Soon it became part of the routine. Days later, while listening to one of the recordings, a nurse suddenly rushed from the room and called Dr. Keller. Elena arrived moments later to find several staff members studying the monitors. Her stomach tightened. What happened? She asked. Dr. Keller pointed toward the screen. Watch. Elena looked. The recording was still playing through a small speaker. Her voice filled the room. As it did, patterns appeared across the monitor. Clear patterns. Increased activity. Consistent activity. The strongest response anyone had seen in months. The doctor looked stunned. Turn it off, he instructed. A nurse stopped the recording. Almost immediately the activity decreased. Silence returned. Everyone exchanged glances. Elena's pulse quickened. Play it again, Dr. Keller said quietly. The recording resumed. Once more the monitor responded. Stronger this time. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally the doctor looked at Elena. It appears he recognizes your voice. Elena stared at Declan. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it. That is impossible. Perhaps, Dr. Keller replied. And yet the evidence is right there. That night, Elena remained beside the bed long after everyone else had gone home. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room glowed beneath dim lamps. She reached for Declan's hand. "I do not know where you are," she whispered. "I do not know if you can hear me. But if you can, keep following my voice." For a moment, nothing happened. Then beneath her fingers, she felt the faintest movement. A tiny twitch, so small she might have doubted it. Except this time she saw it too. Declan's index finger moved ever so slightly against her palm. The finger movement changed everything. By the following morning, word had quietly spread throughout Whitmore Estate. Nurses spoke in hushed voices. Specialists reviewed medical reports twice instead of once. Even Dr. Keller seemed unable to hide his cautious optimism. Yet not everyone welcomed the change. Elena noticed it during breakfast when she entered one of the smaller dining rooms. Conversations stopped the moment she walked in. Staff members exchanged brief glances before returning to their meals. At first she assumed she was imagining things. Then the invitations stopped. Meetings about Declan's care happened without her. Reports that had once been left openly on desks suddenly disappeared into locked folders. Something was changing, and it had nothing to do with medicine. Late that afternoon, Elena finally met Victoria Whitmore in person. Declan's stepmother rarely visited the estate, preferring to remain in the city where she attended charity galas and corporate functions. She arrived in a black luxury sedan and entered the mansion as though she owned every inch of it. Tall, elegant, and impeccably dressed, Victoria carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Her smile appeared polite. Her eyes did not. "Elena," she said smoothly as they met in the main foyer. "I finally have a chance to properly welcome you to the family." Elena forced a polite smile. "Thank you." Victoria studied her for a moment. "I hear the doctors are becoming excited. They are hopeful. Hope can be dangerous." The response caught Elena off guard. Victoria adjusted a bracelet on her wrist. People often see what they want to see. Before Elena could answer, Victoria turned and walked away. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but unease lingered long afterward. That evening, Elena sat beside Declan's bed as usual. She read several chapters from the novel before switching on the recorder. Her own voice filled the room. The monitor responded almost immediately. The familiar pattern appeared once again. Increased activity. Consistent and undeniable. Elena smiled softly. "You are making it very difficult for people to ignore you." The words had barely left her lips when the door opened. A man entered without knocking. He looked younger than Declan, perhaps 30 years old, with expensive clothes and a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You must be Elena." She stood politely. "And you are?" "Sebastian Whitmore." He extended a hand. "Declan's brother." Elena shook it. Something about him felt rehearsed, like an actor performing a role he had practiced many times before. Sebastian glanced toward the monitors. "I hear everyone is talking about miracles now. The doctors are encouraged. Doctors are encouraged whenever they can publish a paper." He laughed lightly. Elena did not. Sebastian walked closer to the bed and studied his brother's face. 8 months, he said quietly. A long time. For a brief moment his expression became unreadable. Then the charming smile returned. "You should not exhaust yourself." "I am not exhausted." "No." He glanced toward the recorder. "Because spending every day talking to someone who never answers sounds exhausting to me." Elena looked at Declan before replying. "I think he hears more than people realize." Sebastian's smile faded slightly. "Be careful with that belief." "Why?" "Because disappointment can be cruel." The room fell silent. After several seconds, Sebastian nodded politely and left. Elena stared after him. The conversation felt wrong, though she could not explain why. Later that night, she sat alone in her bedroom, overlooking the estate gardens. Wind rattled the windows. Autumn rain swept across the dark lawn below. Sleep refused to come. Eventually, she returned to Declan's room. The mansion was quiet. Most lights had been turned off. She slipped into the chair beside his bed and reached for his hand. "I think some people are afraid," she whispered. "Not of losing you. Of finding you again." The words lingered in the darkness. Elena lowered her gaze. "Whatever happens, you are not alone." She squeezed his hand gently. Seconds passed. Then the monitor emitted a stronger tone than usual. Elena looked up sharply. Activity surged across the screen. Not a tiny fluctuation. Not a minor increase. A clear response. The strongest one yet. Her heart raced, and for the first time since arriving at Whitmore Estate, she began to wonder whether someone else had noticed these changes long before she did and desperately wished they would stop. 3 days later, Whitmore Estate prepared for Declan's 35th birthday. In previous years, the occasion attracted governors, celebrities, and business leaders from across the country. This year, there will be no grand celebration, no orchestra, no ballroom filled with guests. The family publicly described it as a quiet gathering out of respect for Declan's condition. Yet Elena sensed another reason. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the possibility that the man in the hospital bed might be coming back. Throughout the morning, she noticed tension spreading through the mansion. Staff members whispered when they thought she could not hear them. Victoria arrived unusually early. Sebastian spent hours behind closed doors making phone calls. Even Dr. Keller appeared distracted. By evening, a small birthday dinner had been arranged in one of the estate's private dining rooms. Declan remained upstairs in his suite, while a handful of family members gathered below. Elena attended because she felt it would be wrong not to. Yet the entire event felt strange. People spoke about Declan as though he were already gone. They discussed company projections, investment opportunities, upcoming board decisions. Very few mentioned the man himself. After less than an hour, Elena excused herself and returned upstairs. The moment she entered Declan's room, she felt relief. The silence here seemed kinder than the conversations downstairs. She pulled a chair beside the bed and smiled softly. "Happy birthday," she said. "I know this is probably not how you imagined spending it." Outside, rain drifted across the windows. The estate lights glowed warmly against the darkness. Elena reached into her pocket and removed the old voice recorder. Over the past several weeks, it had become their bridge, the one thing that consistently reached him. She checked the battery and pressed play. Her recorded voice filled the room. Stories, memories, small pieces of ordinary life. She listened for several minutes before stopping the playback. Then she took a deep breath. "There is something I never told you," she whispered. "When I first arrived here, I was angry. Not at you. At everything. At my situation. At my father. At the feeling that my life was no longer mine." She looked down at their joined hands. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Her eyes filled with tears she had not expected. "You became real to me. Not a billionaire. Not a contract. Just a person who deserved better than being left alone." The room remained quiet. Elena laughed softly through her emotions. "Listen to me. I am having a one-sided conversation again." She wiped her eyes and reached for the recorder one final time. Instead of playing an old recording, she pressed the red button and created a new one. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I do not care if you never wake up. I do not care what happens tomorrow. You are not alone, Declan. Not anymore." She stopped the recording and immediately played it back. The words echoed gently through the room. For a second, nothing happened. Then the monitor emitted a sharp tone. Elena froze. Numbers climbed across the screen. Neural activity surged higher than she had ever seen. "Declan," she whispered. Another tone sounded. His heart rate increased. Not dangerous. Purposefully. Elena stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "Declan." The monitors continued responding. She hurried into the hallway and called for help. Nurses rushed into the room. Dr. Keller arrived moments later. Everyone stared at the screens. Activity continued climbing. "This is impossible," one nurse breathed. Then it happened. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Declan's eyelids trembled. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Elena felt her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Again his eyelids moved. A fraction more this time. Dr. Keller stepped forward. "Declan," he said carefully. "Can you hear me?" No response. The billionaire remained still. Then Elena took a hesitant step closer. Tears blurred her vision. "Declan," she whispered. "It is me." For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as her voice reached him, his eyelids lifted. Not fully, just enough to reveal a glimpse of blue eyes beneath. The room erupted into stunned disbelief. Nurses rushed forward. Doctors called for additional staff. Monitors sounded across the suite. Yet through all the commotion, Declan's gaze searched for only one face. Elena's. And before exhaustion pulled him back into darkness, his eyes remained fixed on her as though her voice had guided him all the way home. The next several days passed in a blur of cautious hope. Specialists traveled from across the country to evaluate Declan's condition. Medical teams adjusted treatments. Therapists developed recovery plans. Yet despite all the excitement surrounding the miracle, one fact remained unchanged. Whenever Declan opened his eyes, he searched for Elena first. The pattern became impossible to ignore. On the fourth morning after his awakening, sunlight spilled across the room as Elena stepped inside, carrying a small tray with tea and a fresh bouquet of white flowers. She froze when she noticed Declan was already awake. His blue eyes followed her immediately. Clearer now, more focused, more present. A faint smile touched his lips. "There you are," he said softly. The sound of his voice nearly brought tears to her eyes. For weeks, she had listened to recordings. For months, she had spoken into silence. Now the silence finally answered. Elena set the tray down and moved closer. "Good morning." Declan studied her face carefully. "I know your voice." She laughed gently. "I would hope so. You have been listening to it for a while. Long before I opened my eyes." His expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes it felt like I was underwater. Everything was distant. Everything except you." Elena sat beside the bed. "You remember that?" "Not clearly." He frowned slightly. "I remember hearing stories. Rain against windows. A book being read." His gaze shifted toward the voice recorder resting on the nearby table. "And that?" Elena followed his eyes. "The recorder?" He nodded slowly. "It felt like a rope. Something I could hold on to." The words settled deep inside her heart. For several moments, neither spoke. The quiet felt comfortable now. Familiar. Later that afternoon, Dr. Keller completed another round of evaluations. The results were encouraging. Declan's memory remained fragmented, but his cognitive recovery exceeded every expectation. He remembered childhood moments, college years, business milestones. Yet certain periods remained clouded, especially the weeks surrounding the accident. "Do not force the memories," Dr. Keller advised. "They often return gradually." Declan agreed, though Elena noticed frustration behind his calm expression. He had spent his entire life solving problems. Now the most important answers remained hidden inside his own mind. As the days passed, physical therapy began. Progress came steadily. First he sat unassisted. Then he stood briefly with support. Each accomplishment felt like a victory celebrated by everyone except Declan himself. He remained focused on what he still could not remember. One evening, Elena found him staring through the large window overlooking the gardens. Autumn had almost disappeared. Winter approached. Bare branches stretched toward a pale gray sky. "You look serious," she said. Declan glanced at her and smiled. "I was trying to remember the first time we met." Elena hesitated. "That is complicated." "Complicated how?" She pulled a chair closer. "Because technically we met on our wedding day." Declan blinked. "Our what?" Elena suddenly realized nobody had explained the full situation yet. Recovery had consumed everyone's attention. The legal marriage seemed almost insignificant compared to survival. Almost. She took a slow breath and told him everything. The financial arrangement, her father's debt, the ceremony, the transport bed inside the church, the vows spoken while he slept. Declan listened without interruption. When she finished, silence filled the room. Elena looked away. "I know it sounds strange." "Strange." A soft laugh escaped him. "Elena, I wake up after 8 months and discover I have a wife." Despite herself, she smiled. "When you put it that way," Declan's expression softened. "Are you unhappy about it?" The question caught her completely off guard. She opened her mouth and then stopped. Because the honest answer was no. Somewhere between the recordings, the novels, and the endless conversations beside his bed, the arrangement had become something else entirely. Before she could respond, Declan reached toward the table and picked up the recorder. His fingers brushed across its worn surface. "Whatever brought me back," he said quietly, "I know one thing." Elena looked at him. Declan held her gaze. "The first person I trusted was not a doctor. It was the woman whose voice refused to give up on me." Winter arrived quietly at Whitmore Estate. Frost covered the gardens each morning, turning the ground silver beneath the rising sun. Declan's recovery continued faster than anyone expected. He could walk short distances now. He attended therapy sessions. He even began reviewing limited company reports from home. To the outside world, the billionaire's return looked like a miracle. To Elena, it felt like watching someone slowly reclaim pieces of himself one day at a time. Yet one piece remained missing. The accident. Every memory connected to that night remained hidden behind a wall he could not break through. The frustration showed more often now. One afternoon, Elena found him sitting alone in the estate library. A stack of documents rested on the table beside him. He was staring at nothing. "Bad day?" she asked gently. Declan exhaled. "I remember my first board meeting. I remember my college graduation. I remember the coffee shop where I bought my first business plan notebook." He looked up. "But I cannot remember the night that changed everything." Elena sat across from him. "Dr. Keller said memories take time. What if they never come back?" She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then we keep moving forward." Declan smiled faintly. "You always make things sound simple." "That is because somebody has to." The smile lingered. But later that evening, something happened. Declan was reviewing old photographs from his phone when he suddenly froze. A sharp expression crossed his face. "Declan?" Elena asked. He stared at the screen. "A bridge." His voice sounded distant. "What?" "I saw a bridge." He pressed his fingers against his temple. "Headlights. Rain." Elena immediately sat beside him. "Do not force it." But the memory had already begun. Fragmented images surfaced. A dark highway. A phone ringing through the car speakers. A familiar voice. Then nothing. The vision disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Declan leaned back, breathing heavily. "Someone called me." Elena's heart skipped. "Who?" He closed his eyes. "I do not know." The next morning, he requested access to records connected to the accident. Victoria opposed the idea immediately. "The doctors said stress could interfere with your recovery," she argued during breakfast. The investigation already concluded it was an accident. Declan calmly stirred his coffee. Then reviewing the records should not be a problem. Victoria's expression tightened. Across the table, Sebastian remained unusually quiet. Elena noticed the exchange, but said nothing. Later that day, boxes of documents arrived from company archives. Police reports, insurance assessments, vehicle inspections. Most appeared routine. Yet one file caught Elena's attention. A maintenance report created just days before the accident. She frowned as she studied it. "Declan." He looked up from another folder. "What is it?" Elena handed him the page. This inspection was scheduled but never completed. Declan scanned the document. His expression darkened. "That is strange. There is more." Elena pointed toward a signature line. "Someone authorized the cancellation." Declan stared at the name. His pulse quickened. The signature belonged to an executive who had resigned shortly after the accident. An executive who once reported directly to Sebastian. Silence filled the room. Neither wanted to jump to conclusions. Yet the coincidence felt impossible to ignore. Over the following week, more questions emerged. Missing emails, altered schedules, financial transfers that seemed unrelated until examined together. Piece by piece, a troubling picture began to form. One evening, Elena sat beside the fireplace reviewing records while Declan slept upstairs. She opened a folder she had nearly ignored earlier. Inside was a printed email exchange. Her eyes widened. The message contained discussions about emergency leadership succession only 3 days before the accident occurred. The sender was one of Sebastian's closest advisors. Elena's stomach tightened. She immediately carried the document upstairs. Declan read the page twice. Then a third time. Slowly, another fragment surfaced from the darkness. Rain striking the windshield. A phone call. Sebastian's voice asking him to attend an unscheduled meeting. The meeting that would have required him to drive across the bridge that night. Declan lowered the document. His face had gone pale. "Elena." "What?" His eyes met hers. For the first time since waking from the coma, genuine fear appeared there. "I do not think what happened to me was an accident." The annual Whitmore Industries board meeting took place 6 weeks later inside the company's headquarters in downtown Chicago. Snow drifted beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows as executives, investors, and board members filled the massive conference room. For months, everyone had assumed the future of the company belonged to Sebastian. With Declan absent, he had gradually expanded his influence, positioning himself as the natural successor. That morning he arrived wearing a confident smile. Victoria sat beside him, equally composed. Neither seemed concerned. Across the city, however, a very different conversation had taken place. Over the previous weeks, Declan and Elena had quietly worked with independent investigators, attorneys, and forensic accountants. What began as scattered questions had become something far more serious. Financial records revealed unusual transfers connected to former executives. Deleted correspondence had been recovered from archived servers. Most importantly, investigators discovered evidence that critical maintenance requests involving Declan's vehicle had been deliberately canceled shortly before the accident. No single piece proved everything. Together, they painted a troubling picture. As board members settled into their seats, Sebastian stood and approached the front of the room. "Thank you all for attending," he began smoothly. "Today marks an important step forward for our company." Several executives nodded. Cameras from financial news outlets quietly recorded the proceedings. Sebastian continued outlining his vision for the future. Then the conference room doors opened. Silence swept across the room. Every head turned. Declan Whitmore walked inside. The room froze. Conversation stopped instantly. Some board members stared in disbelief. Others rose from their chairs. Sebastian's confident expression vanished. Victoria's face lost all color. Declan moved steadily toward the front of the room. Not perfectly. Recovery still demanded effort. But he stood on his own feet. Strong. Present. Alive. "I think," Declan said calmly, "there is one item missing from today's agenda." Nobody spoke. Sebastian forced a smile. "Declan, this is unexpected. Not as unexpected as what I discovered." Elena entered moments later carrying several folders. She took a seat beside the company attorneys. For the next hour, the atmosphere transformed completely. Evidence appeared one piece at a time. Email chains, financial transactions, maintenance records, testimony from former employees. Each document connected to the next. Each answer created new questions. The room grew quieter with every presentation. Sebastian repeatedly attempted to dismiss the findings as misunderstandings, coincidences, administrative errors. Yet the explanations became increasingly difficult to defend. Then Elena revealed the final document. It was a recovered communication discussing leadership succession before the accident ever occurred. The date appeared on a large screen. The room collectively inhaled. Several board members exchanged stunned looks. One director slowly removed his glasses. Another shook his head in disbelief. Declan remained calm throughout. Months earlier, anger might have controlled him. The long journey back had changed something inside him. He simply wanted the truth. Independent investigators presented their conclusions. Authorities had already reviewed the evidence. Formal legal proceedings would continue separately. What mattered now was accountability. One by one, board members voiced their concerns. Support shifted rapidly. By the end of the meeting, the outcome was unavoidable. Sebastian's authority collapsed completely. Victoria offered no defense. For the first time, neither seemed powerful. They simply looked defeated by the truth they could no longer escape. When the meeting finally ended, the conference room slowly emptied. Reporters gathered outside. Attorneys remained behind. Executives discussed emergency leadership transitions. Yet Declan paid little attention to any of it. He found Elena standing near the window overlooking the city skyline. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. "It is over," she said quietly. Declan nodded. "Because you refused to stop asking questions." Elena smiled. "Because you chose to face the truth." For a moment, neither spoke. The city stretched beneath them. Bright lights. Endless movement. A future waiting to begin. Months earlier, they had met under circumstances neither would have chosen. A marriage built from obligation. A life suspended by uncertainty. Now everything has changed. Declan looked at her and realized the most important thing he recovered was not hidden inside a medical chart or a forgotten memory. It was standing beside him. And for the first time since waking up, he felt completely certain about what came next. 1 year later, spring returned to Chicago. The long winter had finally released its grip on the city, and sunlight spilled across the glass towers that carried the Whitmore name. Much had changed during those 12 months. Declan had fully reclaimed his role as chief executive officer. The company was stronger than ever, guided not only by innovation, but by a renewed commitment to integrity. Employees spoke openly about the changes. Investors praised the stability. The crisis that once threatened everything had become a distant chapter in the company's history. Yet the achievement that mattered most to Declan had nothing to do with business. On a warm Saturday evening, hundreds of guests gathered inside a newly renovated concert hall overlooking Lake Michigan. The event supported neurological recovery programs and long-term patient care initiatives across the country. Doctors, nurses, therapists, former patients, and families filled the auditorium. Elena moved through the crowd greeting guests with her usual warmth. Many people recognized her story. Some called her an inspiration. Others thanked her for reminding them that healing often begins with something as simple as showing up every day. Elena never felt comfortable being the center of attention. She simply smiled and redirected the praise toward the medical teams who had helped Declan recover. As the evening progressed, a string quartet performed softly beneath elegant lights. Laughter drifted through the room. Conversations blended into a comforting hum. Then the lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. Declan stepped forward to the microphone. Applause filled the hall. He waited patiently until the room settled. 1 year ago, he began, I attended an event very different from this one. Although at the time, I did not know I was attending anything at all. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. Declan smiled. There was a period when doctors were unsure whether I would ever wake up. There was a period when many people believed my story was finished. He paused. Thankfully, one person disagreed. His eyes found Elena across the room. She felt her heart skip. Guests followed his gaze. Declan continued. Recovery is often described through medicine, science, and therapy. Those things saved my life. But there is another part people rarely talk about. Hope, persistence, human connection. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a familiar object. Elena immediately recognized it. The old voice recorder. The same recorder that had sat beside his bed. The same recorder that had carried her voice through months of silence. A murmur spread through the audience. Declan carefully placed the recorder on a small table beside him. This, he said softly, became my lifeline. He pressed a button. For a moment, only static filled the speakers. Then Elena's recorded voice echoed through the hall. I do not care if you never wake up. I do not care what happens tomorrow. You are not alone, Declan. Not anymore. Silence swept across the room. Many guests lowered their eyes. Others smiled through tears. Elena stood completely still. Hearing those words again felt different now. More powerful. More real. The recording ended. Declan picked up the microphone once more. That sentence reached me when nothing else could. He stepped away from the podium and walked towards Elena. The audience watched in complete silence. Elena's eyes widened as he stopped directly in front of her. Then, with a smile she knew better than anyone, Declan lowered himself onto one knee. A collective gap filled the hall. The first thing that brought me back was your voice, he said. The best part of my future is you. He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple diamond ring. Elegant. Timeless. Elena Hartwell Whitmore, will you choose me again? Tears filled her eyes before she could answer. The audience waited. Declan waited. Elena laughed through her emotions and nodded. Yes. Applause erupted throughout the hall. People rose to their feet. Some cheered. Others wiped away tears. As Declan slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena remembered the frightened young woman standing beside a hospital bed months earlier, convinced her life had been decided for her. She could never have imagined this ending. The wedding that followed several weeks later looked nothing like the first ceremony. There were no contracts, no obligations, no uncertainty, just family, friends, and two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way possible. And as they exchanged vows beneath a bright summer sky, Elena heard the words that had carried them through every challenge. You are not alone. This time, they both smiled. Because they never would be again. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to The Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.